You're not even half the man my father is."
The sentence landed across my dinner table like a blade, and it didn't just cut my pride, it sliced open the truth I'd been hiding. Months of secret payments, a sold guitar, a forged e-signature that turned my name into collateral. In that instant, I understood what silence had cost me. That was the night I stopped being a walking wallet and started drawing a line, one that would pull my son back from excuses, expose a brand built on smoke, and put my name back where it belonged, under my own hand. Here's how a single insult became the hinge that swung my life from quiet damage to honest repair. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Portland smells like salt and pine when the fog slips in off the bay, and most mornings it finds the seam of my back door. The little shop behind my house holds its own weather. A warm drift of sawdust, a lamp that throws a faithful circle on the bench, and tools that have learned my hands as well as I learned theirs. Retirement has not taught me to sit. It has only taught me to move slower and pay attention. If I listen long enough, the grain tells me which way it wants the steel to go. The plane answers with a steady hush, and for a while the world becomes a board I can true. 7 years ago, my wife died, and the house became a museum of small rituals. I polished the oak table on Sundays. I wind the mantel clock even though it quit on me sometime last winter. I make tea in her dented kettle and total up expenses in a ledger with her silver fountain pen. The nib still scratches like it did when we counted grocery money and laughed at how rich a cheap dinner could feel if you decided it mattered. Grief is orderly in my house. It stands in little lines and waits its turn. My son, Evan, carries his mother's soft eyes and my stubborn tilt toward projects that take too long to pay. He can charm a room and pitch a dream before you finish your coffee. Contracts show up, glow, and fade like harbor lights in fog. 3 years ago, he married Talia, a woman who always knows where the light is in a room and how to make it look like a decision she made. She lives through a phone screen the way fishermen live through weather reports. Her plan is a boutique on Exchange Street, white walls and clean shelves, and a window display that tells you who you are before you step inside. I listened, nodded, and reminded myself that hope is not a budget. I did not intend to bankroll any of it. I intended to be a steady dock a man can tie up to when the wind picks up. Then Evan called about a missed payment, and I heard the hesitation a proud son saves for his father. He said stepping in would bruise Talia's pride if it became a family story. Just for a month or two, he told me. I remembered pulling him on a sled at Fort Allen Park, his cheeks raw with cold, and I said I'd handle it. I set up transfers, $1,250 for the mortgage, $275 for the HOA. The invoices clicked through on the 5th of each month, neat as nickels on a counter. To keep the rhythm, I sold the last electric guitar I owned, a 1969 Telecaster with a nick near the jack only I could see. The kid behind the counter smiled at the age of it, and I smiled back like it was a fair trade. A bright, honest twang for a little more time. I ate chowder more nights than I should and pushed the roof repair into spring. At the veterans' breakfast, when talk turned to grandkids and real estate, I used the same line I always use. They're working it out. It sounded kinder than the truth and easier than a lecture I wasn't ready to give. Silence is an easy habit. It feels like varnish. Smooth, protective, a way to keep the wood from swelling. It also seals in rot if you lay it over damage you refuse to name. I told myself I was saving them from embarrassment. The truth is I was saving myself from the sound of my own boundaries. People my age learn to carry worries like pocket knives, useful, hidden, and always there. You keep them folded until you need to cut a knot you tied for the wrong reason. On the afternoon this story settles into its tracks, the radio murmurs baseball scores while I shuck clams at the sink. I iron a cloth napkin because my wife would laugh if I didn't, and I ladle chowder into the blue bowls we bought in our second year of marriage. I text Evan to bring a bottle of something and leave the shop door cracked so Cedar can mingle with butter and thyme. The fog thickens by the minute. The clock on the mantel ticks twice and stops like a man changing his mind. I test the hands, then let them be. Not everything in a house needs correcting at once. I set out 3 plates and lay her silverware just so. I turn the porch light on for no good reason except that welcome, like worry, is a habit. The phone chimes. Evan writes he's close. I open the ledger and draw a neat line under the outgoing payments. Order has a way of pretending to be comfort. Outside, a gull rides an invisible current, hardly moving its wings. Inside, the kettle hums and the kitchen warms until the windows sweat. This is not a birthday or a holiday. No one will make a toast. It is simply a Thursday that asks for a good meal and the kind of conversation that lets a father hear where his son is drifting. I think about the first workbench I ever built and how a man learns to trust weight only after he planes a board truly flat. Trust isn't a speech, it is a surface you test with your palm. Steady, I tell myself out loud, because sometimes the only man who needs to hear me is me. I wipe the table one last time and stand in the doorway of the shop. The light throws my shadow long across the floorboards. I listen to the small engines on the bay and the larger one in my chest. Footsteps will come soon. Words will follow. I don't know yet that I am a week away from saying no out loud. I only know I want Peace to sit at the table with us. Some nights, Peace is a guest who doesn't answer the invitation, and you set a place anyway, just in case she shows. Fog shouldered the porch light into a tight halo when Evan came up the steps, his shoes scuffing like an apology. He held a bottle by its neck and smiled with the speed of a notification. Got the Chardonnay. He set it down as if it might roll away and ran a glance over the sideboard where the ledger lay open. The page reflected a dull window of phone glow on its neat columns, the same way harbor water holds the color of a sky that isn't sure what it wants. He said something breezy about traffic near the bridge, but his eyes kept drifting to the screen he'd placed face up beside his plate, a silent lighthouse blinking at no one. Talia arrived 20 minutes later, heels tapping a metronome that did not match the room. Her dress caught the kitchen light and returned it with interest. Her perfume arrived a half step before she did, citrus and frost and a note of glass. She smiled like a professional, perfectly polite, the way you greet a front desk you need. Her gaze slid past my shoulder to the half-open shop door and rested there as if listening to an old piano working through a sour chord. She chose the chair where the light fell best, drew it a fractional angle toward the window, and placed her phone too, screen up, twin mirrors waiting for affirmation. We began with weather because Maine insists on it, and with harbor traffic because men my age are built out of schedules we never controlled. I mentioned the church footbridge I'd restored, a handrail worn down by Sunday palms and weddings. She nodded without looking. Evan tried 3 sentences about timelines and engagement lift, then fell back into his scroll. I refilled bowls, and steam briefly made the air forgiving. The chowder tasted the way the bay smells at dawn, blunt, clean, honest. Talia cleared her throat softly, a stage cue. A bit heavy, she said of the chowder, as if grating. Her eyes took a quick tour of the table. The setting's busy. She rotated a fork so the tines aligned, then looked up with concern as tidy as her manicure. Have you considered modernizing? It sounded like a medical recommendation. The mantel clock across the room gave 2 stubborn ticks and halted. I wiped a ring of condensation from the table and said I was always improving what needed improving, which is different from replacing what still knows its job. She offered a tour of her future the way agents offer a walkthrough. Exchange Street, white walls, air that looks ironed. She had a list of specifics: footfall, dwell time, average basket, that she delivered without checking notes, a fluent language her followers would applaud. I added neighborhood details she did not ask for, naming the gallery whose openings drag foot traffic up the block and the bakery whose line bends sunlight on Saturdays. Sweet, she said, and I understood she meant quaint. Evan repositioned the bottle so its label faced the room as if good wine could fix angles. We sat in a triangle defined by habit and lighting. She spoke about launch energy, about families who show belief with action. Investing, she said, letting the word shine a little longer than it needed to. It hung between us like a chandelier over a table with the wrong chairs. Evan's thumb tapped the phone 3 times, then stopped. I asked about his week work-wise, and he offered a cheerful kite of air, a handful of nouns that didn't meet a verb. He smiled like he believed them. I smiled like I'd heard them before. My wife's silverware caught a bright seam of light and threw it back, a sliver sharp enough to be a warning. Cedar from the shop edged the room with memory. The house still knew itself whether or not we did. I told a brief story about the bridge rail and how wood learns its weather if you let it, how patience is a craft, not a posture. Tradition can be a trap, Talia said, smiling with her mouth and not her eyes. The word clicked on the plates like a dropped coin. Evan raised the bottle the way a man lifts a flag and poured too fast, froth fretting at the lip of each glass. I kept the cloth clean when I poured mine, habit disguised as care. I asked how her budget was tracking and whether the landlord had built in rent holidays for a soft launch. She redirected the question back into an article of faith. Belief is the budget, she said. The clock had quit pretending by then, its hands were stuck in a time that never happened. She turned her chair 1 degree more toward Evan, and the room rebalanced itself around her center of gravity. Her voice softened, which in some people is how they sharpen. She talked about her father, how he keeps things current, how he has big yes energy, how family succeeds when people stop being precious about the past. She reached out and rested her fork, aligning it with the grain of the table as if to fix a flaw. The fog pressed against the window, flattening the outside world into a single sheet. The kitchen narrowed to the size of the 3 of us, and whatever we believed we were owed. She leaned into the good light and delivered the sentence with a steady hand. "You're not even half the man my father is." It did not ring. It absorbed. Evan froze with his phone in his palm as if a message had finally arrived and turned to stone. The mantel clock held its breath. Steam from the chowder twined and went out. The house, which has heard every good thing and bad thing a family can say, waited to learn whether we would be small or exact. I set the bottle down so lightly the glass did not answer. There is a way to handle a sharp tool that keeps it from turning in your grip. I did not argue. I did not reach for a story that would teach her I had stories. I memorized the sentence like a serial number and filed it where I keep numbers that matter. Cedar breathed from the shop door. The ledger on the sideboard lay open to its honest math. I felt the strange mercy of clarity settle. Not warm, not cold, but clean. Precision was coming, and I would need both hands free. I set the bottle down as if it were a tool I'd sharpened to a fine edge. The glass kissed the table without complaint. In the drift of quiet that followed, Cedar from the shop crossed the steam from the chowder and made a mixed weather of the room, work and welcome colliding in a single breath. I felt the impulse to flare and let it pass like a gust that knows better than to stay. Precision was required, not heat. I have built stairs that hold men for decades. Stairs don't argue, they line up and bear weight. I let that thought square my shoulders. I named the address first, clean and entire, the way you say coordinates when a man is overboard. Building, unit, street, city, zippy. Then I set out the numbers that had become their tide table. 1,250 for the mortgage, 275 for the HOA. 8 consecutive months, transfers on the 5th, each one marked in my ledger with a check from my wife's silver pen. I described the 3 missed HOA cycles and the notices that follow missed cycles, the interest that grows like barnacles if no one scrapes. I did not accuse. I recited the way a carpenter calls measurements so the cut matches the plan. They didn't move. I put a final piece of truth on the table, the one that had cost in memory as well as money. I told them the Telecaster was gone. I said the date on the receipt and saw the counterlight again, how it made old lacquer look young. The nick near the jack was an old map of a night I loved, and now it lived behind someone else's glass. I didn't offer sentiment. I let the details stand and mean what it meant. There are prices beyond price tags. Evan's throat clicked hard enough to hear. His shoulders folded a fraction toward his screen as if the light might forgive him. His thumb hovered and found nowhere to land. He told the truth the way men do when they hope the first confession buys a discount on the second. The big contract fell apart 2 weeks ago. He hadn't said anything because he believed he could hustle a fix before Talia noticed. He used the words fix and before as if the future were a shelf he could reach by stretching. His voice was apology laced with habit, and I recognized both. Talia didn't pick up any of the math. She lifted her chin a degree and made her point not by contesting figures, but by redefining them. Parents don't abandon their kids. The sentence had courtroom posture and kitchen-light warmth, optics and assertion in one gesture. She framed boundaries as betrayal and called it love. She did not slouch. People who curate lives know angles, and she found hers without checking a mirror. I kept my tone dry as a blueprint. I said the payments would end in 45 days. I used the word sunset instead of cut, because what was ending had been allowed to rise without question. I suggested the free city counseling clinic that helps people stabilize budgets, the possibility of temp work while they looked for something lasting, and the need for a written plan. So effort met sequence, and sequence met proof. I said I would help outside the money loop, which is another way of saying I would help without becoming the answer. I didn't add a sermon about adulthood. I have learned that sermons are for pulpits, and even there they don't always land. To make the shift visible, I changed protocol. I told them anything further would require paper, a loan agreement with dates and amounts, receipts kept, signatures in ink, not promises in air. I said the transfers would not happen on text. I said no more patches on leaks we refused to name. I moved in my mind from father as cushion to steward as witness, and the movement surprised me less than it should have. Evan looked between us as if fog had come in fast and hidden 2 shorelines, both of them wrong in different ways. Words arrived in him and fell apart before they made the swim to his mouth. He reached for a sentence that could buy time, and time pretended to be busy elsewhere. The mantel clock refused to rescue him. Its hands kept their lie calmly. A faint digital chime lifted up from the table, not mine. Talia's phone sat at a low angle against a water glass, lens warmed by candlelight, red icon alive. The caption, visible to the corner of my eye, wore the intimacy of close friends like perfume. The framing clipped my face and caught my hands, which for a certain narrative looks like control. Her voice, when she spoke to no one and everyone, was honey. The comments began as numerals and turned to words, the way numbers on a bill turn to trouble if you ignore them. Miser, controlling, financial abuse. Sympathy hearts floated like confetti you can't sweep. Reputation, I learned again, is a house faster to burn than to build. I didn't perform for the lens. I didn't grab or scold or explain. I reached out with 2 fingers and turned the screen face down, slow enough to show there was no rush and no fear. For the record, I said one sentence in an even register, more to the room than to the feed. Boundaries are not abandonment. I made sure to breathe at the end of it. Breathing is the only punctuation that matters when a person is trying to bait you into becoming their story. Plates needed clearing, and I have always believed in letting a task save a moment if it can. I gathered what I had bought and cooked and carried it to the sink with hands that have built tables people keep. I ended the dinner without raising my voice or slamming a door. The sound of water covered the smaller sounds of breath and phone glow. I told them I would email a formal 45-day notice in the morning with dates and terms for the transition. The house exhaled, not out of relief, but because structure had finally been named. On the short walk from table to sink, I felt the truth of the road ahead settle into its 2 lanes. This would not only be arithmetic, it would be optics and, if I was wise, law. I thought about a folder in my desk, the one that held a medical power of attorney from a year when I needed help and signed quickly. Loose hinges can become doors if you ignore them. I let the thought mark tomorrow's list without borrowing tomorrow's fear. The fog leaned heavier on the windows. The shop breathed cedar like a steady friend. I dried one glass at a time and set each in its place. Precision over anger, boundary over noise. 45 days had already started their count. Morning thinned the fog until the bay showed its ribcage of pilings, and the light on my bench looked like a promise I could keep. I decided to treat the mess like a job site, define scope, lay out tools, set the sequence, and refuse to improvise cuts because a clock is loud. I slid the ledger into my jacket pocket, not for show, but because paper steadies me. On the way out, I locked the shop, checked the back gate, and walked to the waterfront cafe that sells the cinnamon rolls Evan has liked since high school. An olive branch is not a blank check. It's a hand extended with fingers still your own. At the outdoor table, the gulls heckled the docks, and diesel from a lobster boat braided the air with coffee. Evan looked like a man who had slept with one eye open, jaw rough, eyes silted, the phone gripped by habit more than hope. I said we'd listen first and plan second, in that order. He nodded and watched a runner stop to stretch as if the runner might supply an answer he could borrow. I placed the paper bag between us and waited for his appetite to remember him. We sat long enough for the steam to soften the sugar, and when he finally reached in, I started the conversation the way a foreman starts a day. List the work, not the worry. I unfolded a 1-page plan I had printed at home and weighted it with my coffee lid. 6 months. Not magic, just steps. Months 1 and 2. Cut discretionary spend to bone, pause premium subscription, sell excess gear and vintage sneakers hiding in their boxes. Months 1 through 3, temp work at a warehouse, marina, or boatyard, anything that swaps talk for wages and buys health coverage if possible. Months 1 through 6, enroll at the city's free credit counseling clinic, build a debt snowball with receipts, log weekly check-ins so the effort leaves a trail. Hard rule, no more secret payments. Any future support from me must be written loans with dates, amounts, and signatures. I underlined what I could offer outside the money loop. Introductions, references, rides at dawn, a toolbox when something breaks. He nodded the way men nod when momentum stands in for change. He liked that the plan had boxes to tick. He said he'd talk it through with Talia tonight. He suggested we keep things off paper for now, and the corner of his mouth tried to sell that as reasonable. I told him polite and firm that paper is not punishment, it's memory you can trust. He looked past me toward the ferry and said the roll was good. I let the quiet do some work. The gulls went back to their gossip, and a boy with a skateboard treated the boardwalk like it was built for him, which, in the good town way, it is. That evening Talia called. Her voice was polished ice, never raised. She said cutting spin kills the brand. That image is capital. That austerity would sabotage momentum. She framed the dinner video as private context, shared only to gather a little support. She used words like narrative and community in a sentence that never touched the cost of rent. I answered in single sentences because single sentences don't get edited into a different man. I declined to debate brand strategy. I repeated that I would help outside the money loop, and that paper would be the rule, not the insult. After I hung up, I logged into online banking to set alerts and found a new auto debit queued under studio support. Scheduled to draft in 3 days, the amount a hair under a threshold that might dodge some automated flags. I hadn't authorized it. The cursor blinked at me like a man clearing his throat to remind me this was not a misunderstanding. It was access, and access had been used like a spare key copied without asking. I wrote the time and the label in the ledger margin, then started triage before irritation could outrun order. I called the bank, canceled the debit, requested a case number, and set real-time transaction texts on every account I use. I rotated passwords, purged saved devices, and asked the agent to confirm the removal in writing. I placed credit freezes with the bureaus, something I should have done the minute my hip surgery healed and the old medical power of attorney no longer had any practical reason to exist. I wrote the agent's name and the case number in the ledger because people forget details when they need them most. I hung up steady. Anger makes a poor screwdriver. It strips heads and leaves you worse off. Then I wrote a letter. I wrote it on paper first to get the tone right. Clear, unaccusing, impossible to misunderstand. All future support would require written loan agreements with a repayment schedule. No exceptions. I would not fund lifestyle costs, only essentials tied to a plan. Any attempt to access my accounts or set debits would end all talks. I signed with my full name, scanned it, and emailed it to both of them with a timestamp. Policies aren't threats, they're guardrails that keep the car from learning gravity the hard way. My phone chimed with a text from a neighbor at our parish and a link to a condo group where an edited clip of the dinner was circulating with captions that preferred story over sequence. The comments ran the usual race: accusations of financial control, a handful of smirking jokes, a few righteous little flames. I recognized the cut. Flattering light on Talia, my hands in crop for menace, selective audio that kept the words she wanted and left out the math. I took screenshots and didn't engage. You don't wrestle a pig to teach the pig manners. In the shop, I reached for the plane to see if the handle still fit my palm. It did. The first pass of steel picked up a curl that let me breathe. A bench respects what you bring to it. Bring frenzy and you scar the wood, bring order and you get a surface you can trust. I worked until the urge to fire back dulled into something less dramatic and more useful. Then I set the plane down and pulled the desk folder that held last year's medical power of attorney from when I couldn't tie my shoe without help. I scanned the clauses and saw what I had given. Limited authority during incapacity, not a general license to act. No one had crossed a legal line yet, but the hinge was there. And hinges grow squeaks if you ignore them. I added review/revoke POA to tomorrow's list and wrote legal aid beside it. Before bed, I set the policy letter in the outbox and pinned the 6-month plan to the kitchen corkboard. The mantel clock still refused to start. I left it alone. Not everything inside a house needs fixing the night you notice it. Some repairs wait for the right tool, the right angle, the right breath. I turned off the porch light, checked the back gate again, and felt the house settle into a patience I recognized. The day had not saved anything, but it had framed it, and sometimes framing is the first honest work you can do. The certified envelope sat on the doormat like something that had learned how to wait. I signed for it at the door and slit it with the small knife I keep for twine and stubborn packages. The paper inside was heavy and bright, the kind that mistakes authority for mercy. Notice of personal guarantee, the header announced in a font that never blinks. I spread the pages on the kitchen counter and felt the room go thin around the edges, as if someone had opened a window in winter. I read the clauses the way a carpenter checks a staircase. Rise, run, rail. Lessee, Exchange Street Boutique. Term, 3 years, penalties escalating like bad weather. Guarantor, my name, my full social security number, and a timestamp from 4 months back when I was home from surgery counting the pills into a week box. The signature block was a stylized version of my name I have never chosen on purpose. I photographed the header, the signature, the page numbers, the file IDs tucked in the footer. Then I opened the ledger and wrote a neat summary. Date received, sender, reference numbers, and a line I didn't like writing. Signature unlike mine. Embarrassment tried to get there first, the way it does when you're old enough to know that being fooled doesn't always mean you were foolish. I let embarrassment pass through me and turned instead to posture. I called the legal aid clinic at the university, intake number I keep for neighbors but had never used for myself, and sent scans while the triage attorney was still on the line. She read quick and clean, her voice was steady as plum. If this was executed outside incapacity, the medical POA would not authorize it, she said. Treat it as identity misuse. Revoke the power of attorney. File an identity theft affidavit. Contact landlord's counsel immediately so you don't ratify it by silence. I wrote those steps verbatim. She added one more thing, gentle but hard. Move today. I texted Evan that I was coming by with papers and that counsel was looped in. No drama, I wrote. We need clarity. He sent a thumbs up that read like a peace offering from a man already cornered. I brought the envelope in a folder and told myself to act the way I would want a foreman to act when the plan's wrong. No yelling, no flapping, just the truth lined up with enough screws to hold. Their apartment was a showroom in winter light, white on white, a single plant staged near the window, a ring light sulking on a tripod in the corner. Evan looked gray around the eyes. Talia stood straight, hands folded at the waist, phone on the island like a patient bird. I set the notice on the counter and slid it into the space between us. This arrived this morning, I said. I asked who initiated the guarantee and how my data traveled. Evan's mouth opened and closed the way a fish rehearses the idea of air. Talia didn't pause. It was a formality, she said. Families, back families. The words wore a silk ribbon and a command at the same time. I didn't touch the sentence, I touched the paper. I explained the scope of the medical POA from last year, limited to incapacity, and told them I was not incapacitated on the date shown. I asked whether my signature had been applied electronically without my consent. The question hung at eye level like a tool you don't borrow. Evan's shoulders slipped. Talia's jaw found its setting. The intent was support, she said. Intent is a fine word when consent is inconvenient. The phone on the island tilted a degree and woke. A soft live went up, captioned for close friends, the kind of vocabulary that means people who will agree with me on schedule. Her voice poured honey. The frame cut my face and found my hands, which was the point. I did not turn to the lens. I looked at the clause that made default contagious. I'm revoking the POA, I said, slow and exact. I'm filing an identity theft report and contacting the landlord's counsel to dispute this guarantee as beyond authority. I added, because you add it once and only once, that any further access to my identifiers would trigger a police report. It wasn't anger, it was policy spoken out loud. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Legal aid, the landlord's attorney, had called them back. Rent in arrears, intention to name all parties, including me, in collection. If I didn't contest now, I could be read as agreeing after the fact. Move first, the message said. I put the phone face down next to the notice and felt the clock inside my ribs choose a speed. Evan broke like a sandbar under a fast tide. I thought it was temporary, he said, until a sponsor came through. Talia kept her line. Brand timelines, launch windows, momentum you never see twice. Consent isn't a brand asset, I said. I laid out what would happen in sequence. Written revocation of the POA, an affidavit with the FTC and the credit bureaus, a direct letter to the landlord's counsel contesting the guarantee and asserting overreach. Paperwork, I said, not drama. I reached out and turned Talia's phone gently face down. She didn't touch my hand. I didn't ask her to. I took photos of the lease header and the exhibit references, emailed myself a contemporaneous memo with names and times, and gathered the copies I'd brought. Then I left. No door slam, no final speech. The hallway smelled like primer and ambition, the scent of a place that keeps repainting the same wall and calling it change. Outside, fog had lifted just enough to give the harbor its line back. I breathed once with it and went home the long way, past the boatyard that remembers what wait feels like. At the kitchen table, I began the work a man can do without anyone's permission. I drafted the POA revocation clean and simple. I pulled credit reports and marked anything I didn't recognize, then started the identity theft affidavit, which asks you to put fear into boxes and sign under penalty that you are telling the truth. I scheduled a clinic appointment for the next morning and wrote a short letter to the landlord's counsel asserting my position and requesting copies of the original execution logs. The mantel clock on the shelf still refused to start. I left it where it was. Some clocks have to witness the exact second a family stops asking feelings to act like facts and lets the law do what it's for. Low tide had pulled the harbor's hemline back and left a dark band of rock that looked like a truth you can't ignore. I walked the firmer strip of sand where gulls picked at seaweed knots, and I let my breathing shorten to the rhythm of chop against stone. 2 roads, plain as day. Keep paying and call it love until love looks like a hole, or set a boundary that will make noise now and buy quiet later. I carried yesterday's legal sprint like lactic acid in my legs and told myself this part would be slower, cleaner, truer. I texted Evan to meet me without cafe tables or ring lights, just a sky finding its color and a wind honest enough to sting. He came zipped into an old hoodie, sleeves pushed to his elbows like a man ready to wash dishes. The phone stayed in his hand until I lifted a palm. He pocketed it without protest, an adjustment so small it felt like a hinge getting oil. We stood shoulder to shoulder facing the water because conversations that go forward are easier when your eyes do too. I laid out what help would mean and what it would not. Outside the money loop, I said, and let the phrase anchor. I can drive you to early shifts, call in a favor for an interview, write a reference. Sit with you at the counseling clinic, even stand in the doorway the first time if your nerves scramble. I will not pay rent, sign guarantees, or agree to off-paper favors because off-paper is where memory dies. The tone I used was surgical. Nothing bled more than it had to. Then I told him about the boatyard on the Fore River. Entry-level work, union track if he keeps his head down, early mornings and cold knuckles, health care after a probationary period, and a skill ladder that adds rungs when you climb. I could introduce him to the manager, a man who shakes hands like he means it. Evan asked if it was forever work, and I said it was honest work, which sits better in the stomach. He stared at the water long enough for a gull to change its mind about us, then nodded with the caution of someone testing ice. We set an accountability frame that didn't require an app to remember. 1 paragraph every Sunday night I said dates, outcomes, what you tried, what you'll try next. Debt counseling appointments confirmed by calendar invites I can see, receipts photographed and filed. If screens tempt drift, I can teach you an envelope budget that runs on paper and friction. Sometimes the effort of writing the number slows the hand that wants to spend it. He took the idea like a man relearning tools, awkward first, then useful. I made the boundary explicit and set it down as love, not punishment. I won't be the answer. I will help you build yours. He repeated it, and the repetition put the sentence inside him where it could work. He asked if I was angry. I told him I was tired of being silent, which is a different animal. Silence picks your pockets while telling you it's guarding the door. I owed both of us a louder spine. He surprised me by volunteering a truth I hadn't asked for. He said the relief he felt when someone bailed him out had become its own small addiction, a high that delayed a low and guaranteed the next one. He used the word addicted without reaching for a softer synonym. I acknowledged it and left it alone long enough to breathe. Then I pointed him to the free therapy group at the community center on Thursdays, told him I'd walked a friend in once and the chairs aren't as hard as they look. He said he'd go this week and didn't hype it. That restraint felt new. On the walk back, I called Lila Brooks, the retired accountant who lives 2 doors down and tithes in color-coded tabs. I asked if she'd spend an hour tomorrow reconciling statements, confirming freezes, setting transaction alerts, and glancing at beneficiaries and any dormant authorizations that might cause trouble later. She said she'd bring a pen that writes secrets into daylight. Her calm always makes me stand up straighter. At home, I built a box that named the fight. 4 folders, Optics, legal, banking, employment. Into optics went screenshots of the edited clip and the draft of the 1-minute video I hadn't posted. Legal got the POA revocation draft, the identity theft affidavit half-filled, and the first letter to the landlord's counsel. Banking took the case numbers and the list of locks I'd changed. Employment held the printed listing for the boatyard in the name of the manager beside a number that still belongs to a man, not a phone tree. Labeling the mess didn't clean it, but it put handles on it. In the shop, I set my phone on a shelf and recorded a 60-second video to no one. My face, one light, no names. Silence isn't love. Boundaries are. The words felt less like speech and more like nailing a ledger board into studs. I saved it to drafts. A promise to myself has more gravity when it can be played back. I oiled the plane handle, touched up one chisel until it caught hair and then apologized for it, and swept the floor just to hear the broom say we were finished for now. In the living room, the mantel clock kept its stubborn pose. I left it stopped on purpose, a witness to the pivot. Some devices need to record the moment before they're given a new one. On the porch, I handed Evan the boatyard manager's name, the clinic link, and the 3 rules in a text I'd already written to cut hesitation off at the knees, paper, presence, proof. He thanked me without a speech. I didn't say I was proud. I said I'd rate his update Sunday, which is a better promise because it names time. Talia got a different kind of message, short, neutral, and immune to screenshots that lie. POA revocation in progress. Landlord's counsel contacted. Any future communication in writing only. I won't engage by DM or live. Logistics have a way of pulling drama's teeth. I pinned the week plan to the corkboard, set my phone face down, and let the house settle into its own heartbeat. Choosing a boundary is a vote for a future you can look in the eye. Outside, a gull found a thermal and let it carry him without pretense. Inside, a man in his late 60s stood in a room he can afford and told himself the surf in his ears is not fear. It is steadiness arriving, one wave at a time. The landlord's attorney's office smelled like fresh toner and ambition, glass walls, a rug that turned footsteps into courtesy, coffee that could etch a spoon. My legal aid lawyer sat to my left with a yellow pad and a pen that clicked but never fidgeted. Across from us, the landlord's counsel spread a slim stack of pages as if dealing a calm game that only numbers win. Arrears, late fee ladders, the signed guarantee with my name under a signature style I do not use. I kept my hands flat and my voice in the pocket where carpenters keep pencils. Reachable, precise. We led with scope, not character. My attorney placed last year's medical power of attorney on the table, the clause that says, during incapacity only, highlighted in soft gold. Alongside it, a clean revocation draft dated today. I requested the execution logs for the e-signature, IP addresses, timestamps, audit trail, who typed what when. The other lawyer nodded once and made a note. When she acknowledged I had not been medically incapacitated on the date shown, the room cooled a degree. Paper has weather, too. My little video, stripped of hashtags, picked up a second life I didn't plan. A community account reposted one line, "Boundaries are how love learns to last," without tagging me. The caption was simply needed. It didn't swell, it settled. I took a long walk by the water. Gulls argued over nothing with the conviction of people on the internet. A lobster boat shouldered past the breakwater and left a wake that shredded then mended. At home, the risk box grew tabs, audit trail, surrender draft. I sharpened a pencil until the shavings curled like ribbon and wrote tomorrow's list in block print. The mantel clock stayed stopped, an object lesson in accuracy. It still marked the second a family chose structure over noise. I left it that way. I wanted a witness that did not move, not yet. The work ahead was signatures and steps. I could do signatures and steps. What I wanted was not victory. It was exit. Legal aid proposed a business path. Evan would surrender the space in 30 days, broom clean, and the landlord would halt any plan to name me if two conditions were met: my removal from all guarantees and assigned early termination or reassignment that cleared my name. "We'll consider upon proof of good faith exit," the other lawyer said. Consider was good enough to build a bridge to next week. Evan attended, jacket a size off, eyes a shade past sleep. He confirmed arrears and asked what a payment plan could look like that did not mention me. He looked at me once as if hoping to borrow resolve. I kept my gaze on the paper. Family meetings break when they turn into family. This was a business morning wearing family clothes, and I intended to keep it that way. Talia argued brand harm, as if narrative could pay rent in arrears. She spoke cleanly about launch calendars, sunk costs, and the reputational damage of a forced exit. The landlord's counsel listened with a face trained by leases, not feeds. "Our concern is possession and rent," she said. My lawyer restated our aim: uncouple my name, end the guarantee, set an exit clock. Feelings could live elsewhere. We were building a list. We wrote the list out loud. The landlord would send a draft surrender and early termination by close of business. I would deliver a notarized revocation within 24 hours. Evan would propose a repayment schedule anchored to his income, not my pockets. The platform would produce the e-sign audit trail. We scheduled a check-in for 7 days. It is surprising how human a table can feel when every edge is labeled. Back home, I moved from meeting to paperwork the way a man moves from rail to deck. I finalized and notarized the revocation, then filed the identity theft affidavit with the FTC and called the non-emergency line for an incident number. I typed a formal dispute to the landlord's counsel stating that the guarantee was ultra vires, beyond any authority, and requesting copies of the original execution logs. I printed the confirmations and slid each into the right folder. Legal, banking, optics. The ledger received a line of today's work: "You cannot think you did a thing, you must write that you did it." In the shop, with the oak bench behind me, I recorded and posted the 1-minute video I'd saved in drafts. No names, no blame, just my face and a sentence that had become the spine of this season. "Silence isn't love. Boundaries are." I disabled comments. "Testimony is not a town hall, it's a door you open and leave unlocked." The ripples came not through the screen, but through people. A nod at the parish pantry when I dropped off canned soup. "Good for you," a neighbor said outside the hardware store, handing me a pack of sandpaper I'd forgotten I was buying. One man I know from the marina turned his shoulder a degree colder, which told me he'd already picked a story and married it. I logged nothing from these encounters except the reminder that who I am does not depend on a feed. Evidence I hadn't asked for found me. A neighbor texted to say his smart speaker had captured a full, unedited audio file from our dinner, an accidental recording of insult and response. He sent it privately. In it, the sentence landed exactly as it had, and my answer sounded like a measured cabinet door closing. The file made a quiet circuit among locals, and then someone who works in compliance at a national brand heard it. Domino's do not announce themselves. Talia received a polite email. Pending sponsorship pause due to inconsistencies flagged during financial review. It wished her well. Screenshots appeared in our group thread, and the tone of the day shifted from performance to math. Optics had been the first fight. Cash followed optics, as it always does. No one cheered. The room simply had less air in it. Evan texted me 3 words that belong to adulthood: "I want out." We did not rehearse regret. We talked logistics. Inventory would be boxed, a walkthrough with the landlord scheduled. Legal aid would provide a template for a repayment plan that lived on his ledger, not mine. "Action beats apology," I wrote. He wrote back, "Understood." And then, after a minute that read like a swallow, "Thank you for the contact at the boatyard." Daybreak found the shop hushed and clean, the oak bench squared to the window like a man ready to hear himself. I wrote 4 lines on an index card and pinned it above the vise. Convert talk to paper. Surrender draft. Repayment plan. Boatyard intro. Estate hygiene. The list steadied me the way a taut string steadies a chalk line. I wasn't hunting victory. I was building proof. An email from the Landlord's Council arrived at 8:07. Draft. Surrender and early termination. I printed it and read like a man measuring a staircase. One clause at a time. Condition of premises, holdover penalties. The paragraph I needed most in plain type. Landlord releases Walter Jennings from any and all guarantees alleged or implied. I circled the dates, flagged the inspection checklist, and penciled no admission of liability in the margin. Legal aid replied within the hour. Modest edits, clear clock, photographs before the walkthrough. I breathed out and sent the red line back. I called Evan. He answered on the second ring, voice sanded down to the truth. He'd already boxed the back room and scheduled a cleaner. He'd booked a walkthrough 3 Tuesdays from now at 10 a.m., and he repeated the line we'd been learning. Action beats apology. I told him to photograph everything, wide shots and details, meter readings, the state of the baseboards, and to email the lot to himself and to legal aid so time couldn't argue later. He wrote the steps down aloud like a man making a cut list. Pack, clean, photos, walkthrough, keys. The repayment plan needed to live where money lives, not in the air. Legal aid sent a template. I adjusted the numbers to what Evan could plausibly earn at entry-level wages and not to what he wished a sponsor would pay. Bi-weekly transfers. A missed payment clause that required him to notify and propose an adjusted schedule within 7 days. No cross-default to me. He swallowed once and agreed. I refused the itch to say I was proud. I kept to the spine of the day. Paper first, feelings later. The boatyard call took 3 tries. When the manager answered, I heard the kind of patience a tide table teaches. He could see Evan at 6:15 a.m. tomorrow, entry level, probationary period. Union track if he showed up sober on time and stayed the entire shift. Bring gloves, he said, and I promised he would. I texted address, gate code, and the 3 rules: paper, presence, proof like a header on a blueprint. Introductions are promises. I made mine carefully. Next, counseling and the habits that keep paper honest. I booked Evan's first slot at the City Credit Clinic and CC'd him on the confirmation. I texted the community center's Thursday therapy group hours and told him the chairs were better than they looked. I built a repeating reminder for our Sunday 1-paragraph check-ins and showed him over the phone how to snap and file receipts into a dated folder. It took 10 minutes to teach. It will take months to become muscle, but everything true has a ramp. Talia received a different kind of message. I drafted an email with the friction polished out. Surrender draft under review. Walkthrough date confirmed. Contact channel is email only. I reminded her that any attempt to access my accounts would end communication. No sermon, guardrails. I pressed send and didn't check for a read receipt. Logistics are not a conversation. In the afternoon, I kept an appointment with an elder law attorney whose desk looked like a well-cut dovetail. No gaps, no splinters. We updated my will, designated a cousin in Vermont as both financial and medical power of attorney, and removed authorizations that had outlived their kindness. We confirmed beneficiaries and added a note I should have made years ago. Do not accept electronic signatures without a voice call and a witness. At home, I set fraud alerts and froze the small credit lines I hadn't used in a decade. Layla Brooks arrived with her tabs and glasses and reconciled my statements until the columns sang. She left a checklist taped inside my desk drawer that began with, "Breathe before you click." Because life refuses to wait while paper rearranges itself. I taught my Wednesday night carpentry class. 3 retirees and a high school custodian stood around the bench while I showed them how to cut a straight edge without chasing it. We talked about patience and how wood teaches it better than lectures. When one man's cut wandered, and his mouth did too, I told him the sentence I'd learned to trust this month: reset, don't rage. He laughed, and the second cut held. Back home, the surrender draft returned with our edits accepted. We signed at the kitchen table, Evan on his lines, me on mine where they released my name. Legal aid witnessed. Evan emailed the PDF to the landlord with his first transfer scheduled for Friday. It wasn't triumph, it was a brass latch closing cleanly. Evan texted photos from the boutique. Walls, outlets, baseboards, ceiling tiles, meters. He'd made a checklist and stuck to it. He booked a cleaner. He asked if I wanted to be at the walkthrough. I told him no and meant it. Support is not substitution. Take wide shots and details, I wrote. Send them to your folder. He replied with a thumbs up that didn't try to be more than it was. The next morning at 6:14 a.m., a photo lit my screen. The boatyard gate in gray light, a hard hat, borrowed gloves, the river lifting in a pale tide. Here, he wrote, I'll shift. Then sleep. Then repeat, I answered. He sent another photo at noon, boots muddy, face tired, eyes clear. He didn't add a caption. I didn't need one. I archived the DMs that asked for a fight and shut replies on the 1-minute video. A local page posted a practical notice about unauthorized debits and linked city resources. The narrative cooled into information, which is all it ever should have been. I put my phone face down and listened to the house breathe. At dusk, I took down the mantel clock I had left stopped as a witness. I eased in a fresh battery. The second hand stuttered once, twice, and then found its cadence. Breath returning. Not triumph, not absolution, just a room finding its pace again. I wrote the day's work in the ledger and underlined the last line. Drafts became signatures. Outside, the bay shifted color, and somewhere a gull decided, briefly, to be quiet. The work ahead was closing loops and honoring them. I can do loops. I can honor. The email arrived just after 7 with the courtly ping I'd come to associate with news that matters. Fully executed, the subject read, and inside sat the surrender and early termination, initials where they ought to be, signatures where they count. Halfway down page 3, the sentence I'd been working toward waited in plain type. The landlord releases Walter Jennings from any and all guarantees alleged or implied. I printed 2 copies, slid one into the legal folder under a tab that says release, and wrote a thick line in the ledger. Liability, 0. Relief moved through the house like new air. It was not a cheer, it was a room remembering how to breathe. By 10, Evan had finished the walkthrough. He sent a tidy link, photos with timestamps, meter readings in crisp numerals, a short video showing keys handed over and the latch swung shut. I answered with one sentence because excess would only dilute the medicine. Good work, keep going. He wrote back a simple, will do, the kind of promise that only lives if the next hour cooperates. 2 days later, his first wages from the boatyard landed. He forwarded a screenshot of the repayment transfer, bi-weekly as agreed, to the account marked in the plan. He didn't attach adjectives to it, just the image and the word sent. A second text arrived at lunch. A palm shot of his hands, new calluses mapping where a handle had found him. Earned, he wrote, not a complaint, a receipt. A rhythm replaced the noise. Evan moved into a narrow room off a kitchen he shares with 3 shift workers who speak fluent alarm clocks. Morning started at 4:30, coffee from a pot you don't scrub until Sunday, boots, a bus, a gate. Evenings ended in a coin-op laundry where heat and tiredness do what lectures can't. On Sundays, the promised paragraph arrived without prompting. Dates, outcomes, next steps, rarely more than 8 lines, often exactly what I needed. He logged what the counseling clinic taught him about debt and what the Thursday group asked him to notice about relief. He didn't try to impress me. He tracked himself. Talia took a separate train line into the future. A last email confirmed the final logistics, and a forwarding address in Miami attached to a collaboration that requires sun, cameras, and a version of optimism I don't carry anymore. We wished each other well with the neutral grammar of people who will not be in the same rooms again. No gloating, no sermon, not even the dignified itch to summarize. The line was clean. Sometimes adulthood is a door that closes without a speech. The town's temperature cooled. At the parish pantry, a volunteer squeezed my forearm and said nothing, which carried more comfort than a dozen words. At the hardware store, the owner asked how my YouTube career was going, and we both laughed at the shape of that sentence. My 1-minute video stayed up with comments off. It turned into a small signpost on a side road. If you needed it, there it was. If you didn't, you passed by. Paperwork, the kind that keeps a man's name sturdy, fell into its right places. I signed the updated will and filed the new powers of attorney, financial and medical, naming my cousin in Vermont, a person whose steadiness has a sound. Beneficiaries were confirmed, old authorizations retired, fraud alerts and freezes checked twice. Lila came by with her colored tabs like a parade of order and did a final pass on the drawers. "Paper listens when you're firm," she said, and left me a small pad of neon flags as if she were handing me spare nails. Hands and heart both needed work, so I taught my Wednesday carpentry class and we finished a bookcase. It was nothing grand, 2 uprights, 3 shelves, a back that insisted on square. The high school custodian who'd been doubting his eye set it on the floor and saw all 4 feet meet without a wobble. He stood back with the exact grin I've seen on men when a door finally closes true. Useful came back to me in that moment, not as applause, but as the calm in your chest when an angle you cut turns out to be what the drawing asked for. At home later, I found a folded page under the ledger. Evan had left it without ceremony. In a hand that had learned caution, he named the old pattern, the rush of rescue, the crash that followed, the way he kept buying tomorrow with a loan from me. "Thank you for choosing a boundary instead of a bailout," he wrote. No flourish, no praise request, no hidden invoice for affection, just a sentence fit to be saved. He turned in early. A 5 a.m. call time doesn't care about speeches either. I took my usual walk by the water as dusk folded up the day. A lobster boat shouldered toward the slip, the deckhand coiling line with the unconscious competence that only repetition grants. Gulls performed their ancient argument and forgot the reason half a minute later. The harbor held everything the way a good joint holds 2 boards, tight, forgiving, built to move a hair without breaking. This was not revenge, it was a structural repair. Remove the rot, fit in new stock, leave a gap small enough for expansion when the weather changes. Back at the house, the mantel clock kept its pace as if it had never been stubborn at all. The shop floor was swept, the bench set with a chisel that could shave a hair and a plane that sang its narrow song. I took the risk box off the table and wrote a new label, Records, kept but closed. I made chowder for one with the ease of someone who finally understands that a table set for one is not a failure. It is a dinner that knows its guest. I ate at the oak table and let the room be exactly the size it is. The second hand ticked with the light authority of an oar dipping water. I put my palm to the wood and felt the grain's faithful quiet. The outcome was not winning, it was standing. Tomorrow would ask for ordinary courage. To read the Sunday paragraph and answer with the right number of words, to lock the shop, to teach patience to men who think a sander is faster than a plane, to cook enough for one and be grateful for enough. Good, I have some. Morning lives quieter now. The kettle hums without hurrying. The mantel clock keeps a modest pulse that feels like a hand on a shoulder, not a metronome. I set 1 bowl for chowder and 1 spoon, the silver our hands wore smooth, and I let the steam lift like a small ceremony. This isn't loneliness. It's a room at its right size, a table telling the truth about who is eating and why. After months of drafting, notarizing, calling, countersigning, I have come to like the sound of plain things doing their jobs. Silence isn't love. Boundaries are. I know the sentence now the way I know the weight of the plane in my palm. Silence varnished the rot. It made everything look glossy while the grain below swelled and split. Boundaries let air and law work where they should, drying what needs drying, cutting out what cannot be saved, fastening what will hold. There was a long season when I paid to keep peace, when I called it kindness to fund wishes, when I sold a guitar and told myself music could live in memory. I do not regret the Telecaster, not anymore. It bought me the measurement I needed, the exact edge of what I will never sell again, my name. Fatherhood used to mean absorbing the blow and smiling through the bruise. I see now a father's task is teaching reality early enough that a son can stand when no one's looking. Evan's life is smaller in the ways that matter and larger in the ways that last. He sends a paragraph on Sundays instead of a story. He grips a handle he did not design and turns it all day, and the handle answers back with wages, not applause. We don't overtalk. We let the cadence of work speak the sentences no pep talk can hold. The legal pieces were never weapons, they were fences. A revocation that says who may not act in my name, an affidavit that says what happened in words a court can hear, a release that prints 0 where a number might have been imagined. Fences keep cattle in and coyotes out, and they also let the neighbors know where the yard stops. If you are my age, make your powers of attorney narrow. Review them yearly. Write down who signs what, when, and how. Ask for execution logs. These are not suspicions. They are seatbelts. Most days you won't need them. The day you do, you'll be grateful they click. Generosity without policy breeds dependence. Generosity with policy breeds dignity. I used to believe saying yes proved love. Now I believe saying yes on paper proves it twice, once to the person you're helping and again to the future when memories get creative. The day I declined to pay rent was not the day love ended. It was the day it stopped doing work it could not do. Evan didn't need a sponsor. He needed friction, sequence, proof. He needed to find out what his hands could make besides a plea. The feed tried to make theater. The neighborhood remembered behavior. At the pantry, a nod means, I saw you. At the hardware store, a joke means the story is cooling. Online, a sentence from my 1-minute video made a small circle and then sat down. That is fine. Reputation should grow where you live. If people want to know who you are, let them watch you carry your groceries and return your cart. I do not keep a grudge, I hold a line. Forgiveness is easy when you pretend nothing happened. It is difficult and real when consequences remain. Evan is forgiven and accountable. Talia is unresented and far. The door is not barricaded, but it is not propped open either. She took her version of the future South, and may it treat her kindly. The line holds for both of us, and that is its mercy. People tell stories about age as if it were a locked gate. At 68, I changed more in 6 months than I had in 6 years. I learned to freeze credit, file an affidavit, ask for an audit trail, and say no without adding a trembling apology. I learned that usefulness returns in humble jobs, teaching a straight cut on a Wednesday night, answering a son's 1-paragraph report with the right-sized reply, sweeping the shop until its quiet starts inside your chest. Late is a word that serves fear. Patterns break when you pick up a different tool. Carpentry keeps handing me metaphors I can trust. When you cut out rot, you do not jam new stock tight. You fit it true and leave a hairline for the weather. That sliver of space is the difference between a repair that lasts and one that splits next season. A boundary is that gap. It honors expansion and contraction. It says, you can change without breaking me. I rest my palm on the oak table and feel the proof. Seasons have moved through this room and the top still sits flat because whoever made it respected the wood's future. To the man I was, the one who thought paying bought peace, I owe gratitude for endurance and a correction for the method. You were afraid of being the bad guy. You thought a raised voice broke a family quicker than a quiet check. You were half right. It wasn't the voice, it was the absence of a line. Courtesy plus law turned out to be a better cure than endurance plus secrecy. If you need that lesson again, it's taped inside the desk drawer where the tabs live. To anyone listening who is closer to my age than to Evan's, check your authorizations. Shrink what others can do in your name. Write the policy before the storm. Say a clean sentence once. Document what you did. Ask for help from clinics, legal aid, and honest neighbors with colored tabs. Then breathe, because the point of a boundary is not to build a fort. It is to let a house breathe right. The clock ticks, not to hurry me, but to keep company. In the shop, I set a board and take one true shaving. The ribbon falls to the floor and curls like a small, obedient truth. I hang the index card, convert talk to paper, on a nail above the bench. It is no longer a to-do. It is a keepsake. Tomorrow's vows are modest by design. Read Evan's paragraph, teach 3 men to cut square, keep my name clean in ink. The outcome wasn't winning. It was standing and letting love learn the strength of a line. In the end, the true measure of resilience is not in how loudly we fight, but in how steadily we stand. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges that let respect and love survive the storms. Silence may hide wounds, but clarity heals them. Life always gives us a choice: to shrink into fear or to grow into truth. Thank you for watching. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that matter.